One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight is this whole element around contact tracing. So right now, contact tracers are being hired en masse. So we've got thousands and thousands of people being trained, going through 5-hour courses for contact tracing. And what you have to understand about a pandemic or an epidemic is, generally speaking, contact tracers are not employed on the tail end of a pandemic. They're typically supposed to be employed and utilized on the front end of a pandemic to stop the spread. So this is one of those things that if you look at what's happening now, the government didn't hire contact tracers 2 or 3 months ago, but they started really ramping it up now. So why are they ramping it up now? If we're seeing this disease actually start to drop, and we're seeing that the mortality rate is actually quite low, and that even the virulence factor of this disease is not quite as high as what we originally thought it to be. There's new studies coming out showing that this whole I'll call it a myth because it was never really proven. There was never really any research that showed that people who were asymptomatic could actually spread the disease. There was no great evidence that was produced. It was one of those things that was extrapolated and then launched all over TV to scare people. But contact tracers, if we were really worried, these guys should have been put in place months ago. So again, if the government was really if they were really concerned about your safety to the level many of you think they are, then this would have been implemented quite a while back. But now they're starting to train contact tracers, and so we'll talk a little bit more about why that's a problem. But what I want you to pay attention to is, what are your politicians currently doing? I've actually already contacted my local representative adamantly to oppose any contact tracing being used in the state of Texas, because it's an infringement upon your rights to have somebody come into your home or even call your home or have you shoot videos of your home to make sure that you are actually isolating yourself from the rest of the world based on whether or not somebody's cell phone picked up that you were in the vicinity of them in a building somewhere where they also were located. This is what contact tracing is. Any of you who are downloading the new updates to your iPhone or your Android phones realize that one of the applications on the phone is actually a contact tracing application that is designed to spy on you. It's designed to spy on your location. Now, many of you already have the location features on your phone set and turned on, but what these new updates are designed to do is actually track and follow you and then implement that data with everyone else who owns a phone, so that if somebody comes down positive with COVID, then they can take everyone who was in contact with that person, not even necessarily in direct contact, but in the same building, within the same vicinity, and then contact you and then ask you to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks. Again, a huge infringement upon your rights. We don't quarantine asymptomatic people. We don't quarantine healthy individuals in a pandemic. This is the first time it's ever been done, and the outcome, again, which has been to crash our economy, when we have perfect examples where quarantine wasn't actually performed and the economy's held up and people didn't get sick and didn't die to any massive level. So contact tracers are a very, very real possibility and a very, very real problem coming to your neighborhood, most likely in the fall. Because one of the things I want you to be prepared for in the fall is a second wave. A second wave, and whether it will be real or whether it will be false. I mean, again, I can use this one as an example. If you saw this, there's a condition in children called Kawasaki's disease. And there's no real research linking Kawasaki's disease to COVID. But what we saw happen, it was about a week and a half ago, was there were like 10 kids that had some of the symptoms of Kawasaki's that may or may not have had COVID, and they were linking that. And what the media did is they ran with that story saying, oh no, now children are being affected by COVID with Kawasaki symptoms, and that's not at all what any research has shown. So again, the media took information, extrapolated it to a greater level. So they extrapolated it to create and produce fear amongst parents, right? Because if you're a parent, you've got a child, of course you don't want your child to have a vascular coagulopathy type of disease like Kawasaki's. And so, with that fear in mind, what is that fear going to do? We've talked about this a number of times. Fear creates behavioral change. But the problem with acting in fear is that you don't think clearly. You lose your capacity to intelligently analyze and to logically analyze the situation, so you make rash decisions. And so, again, the media tried to create this huge fear amongst children with Kawasaki's, and I predict that we're going to see the same thing happen in the fall. We're going to see the second wave where the media hypes it and creates more fear to try to create more stay-at-home orders, to try to basically, create a continuation or a phase 2 of this pandemic shutdown. And I don't want to be political. I'm not trying to be political because I don't know whether this is political or not. I think people in politics are taking advantage of what's happening, and so in that regard, maybe it's political. I think some people in some states and some counties are trying to use this opportunity to keep people to stay at home so that they can cheat the ballot box with distance voting. It's very easy to cheat that. And so I think it's being used politically, but I don't necessarily think it was created politically in the beginning. So again, I want you to just be prepared for what may come in the fall. It will be a second wave where the media hypes this thing up, where then governors and mayors of cities across the United States, and maybe even if you're not in the United States, other countries, where we see this recreation of government overreach. And this is what I want to warn you against, because there's an old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I don't want you to fall victim to the same mentality that we were all victims of this first go round, mainly because there wasn't enough data to know better whether or not this virus was going to kill millions of people. We just didn't know. It was an unknown. Now there's a known factor. Now there's a big known factor. The mortality rate doesn't justify the actions that were taken. So don't let this potential for a second wave in the fall create enough hype for you to allow this to happen again. Because ultimately, remember that power of the government is given to the government by the people, and not the other way around. The government doesn't give you the power to go to work. The government doesn't get to dictate what is and what is not an essential business. I mean, in that regard, pot dispensaries were considered essential, but dentists' offices were not considered essential. You could go into Target and you could shop. You could go into Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart and shop, but your children, if you had high school children, couldn't go to a graduation, couldn't earn their rite of passage by having a graduation ceremony. Yet you could have just as many people cooped into a grocery store together. So again, if this was being done for our safety, you wouldn't see so many dichotomies in the advice. Going back even to the very beginning of this thing. If you remember, at first it was, I said this earlier, flatten the curve, then it was stop the spread. But it was also, hey, we need more respirators, and hey, we need more hospital beds. Hey, what happened is now we're giving respirators away to foreign countries because we ordered so many and paid for so many that never got used, right? The hospital ships that were harbored in New York were never really used. I think 7 of the beds on a ship that had hundreds of hospital beds were actually used, and our hospitals stayed empty, and our hospitals were furloughing employees, all based on fear, and we were being shown media lies in the very beginning. So again, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Don't allow this to happen again, because the government's power comes from you. The authority of the government doesn't come because the government knows better. They obviously don't know better. All the predictions on this thing were wrong. All of the actions that were taken on this thing were horribly inaccurate and way too limiting. And what we're coming into and what we're probably going to see in the next 6 to 9 months, it hasn't hit yet, because it's kind of like have you ever been punched in the face? You sit there for a minute, you're just kind of dazed and stunned before you can actually think about what actually just happened to you. And that's where we're at right now. This whole pandemic has just punched America in the face, and people are just now coming to realize that we've probably been had. And so again, now that you're going to start thinking logically, remember where government power comes from. Remember that. And some states are starting to figure that out, and some counties are starting to figure that out. But don't be a victim to a second wave of media lies, hype, and panic.
Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.